Tucker Carlson, fresh off of his trip to Moscow, where he interviewed Vladimir Putin, spoke at the World Government Summit, where he offered a reflection on his trip to Russia. Now, Tucker Carlson has been branded a nationalist, American chauvinist, a Western chauvinist, but he had some harsh words for his own country and some pretty favorable words for the Eastern Russian Empire. Here is Tucker Carlson talking about how much nicer it was in Moscow than it is here in the United States.
Radicalizing, very shocking and very disturbing for me was the city of Moscow, where I'd never been, the biggest city in Europe, 13 million people. And it is so much nicer than any city in my country. I had no idea. My father spent a lot of time there in the 80s when he worked for the US government and barely had electricity. And now it is so much cleaner and safer and prettier aesthetically. It's architecture, it's food, it's service than any country, city in the United States that you have to, and this is non-ideological. How did that happen? How did that happen? And at a certain point, I don't think the average person cares as much about abstractions as about the concrete reality of his life. And if you can't use your subway, for example, as many people are afraid to in New York City because it's too dangerous, you have to sort of wonder, like, isn't that the ultimate measure of leadership? And that's true, by the way, it's radicalizing for an American to go to Moscow. I didn't know that, I've learned it this week, to Singapore, to Tokyo, to Dubai and Abu Dhabi. Because these cities, no matter how we're told they're run and on what principles they're run, are wonderful places to live that don't have rampant inflation, where you're not going to get raped.
Sir,
excuse me. What is that?
Wow. You know, that means a lot coming from Tucker Carlson. When did you ever think you'd hear a Fox News host speaking so highly of these other countries around the world, right? We're used to hearing a lot of jingoism from the American right, but Tucker is clearly on a journey, not just a physical journey around the world, but clearly a political and philosophical journey. To hear him speak so highly of these places around the world that are so often dismissed as third world countries, right, or inferior countries to us. Quite amazing. Now, I'm a homebody myself. I'm a bit of a hermit. But Kit, you've spent a lot of time in Japan. And so that was one of the places that he rattled off on that list. What's your take on this?
Well, okay, I've never been to Moscow, so I'm going to take Tucker's word for this. But in regards to
when you come to Moscow, I will show you around. I'll show you around town. Yeah.
But
we'll go out for drinks. Yeah.
Well, when it comes down to Tokyo or Kyoto,
I forgot. That's right. I'm in Albany. Albany. I keep forgetting. Albany.
Hiroshima. Those three cities. Their public transportation on point, makes anything in Chicago look completely run down, and makes it was interesting seeing cities in another country in regards to how they present themselves, how they clean up after themselves, how they run things on time. And especially with the trains, it has to be on time. It is efficient. In Chicago, it's not like that. We get a 10-minute delay and it is what it is. In Japan, in Tokyo, that doesn't fly. In Kyoto, that doesn't fly. In Hiroshima, that doesn't fly. That goes for every single city in Japan. And look, every country has its problems. There's no such thing as perfect. But I remember when I went to visit Japan in December or Christmas Day of 2019 and coming back in February 3rd of 2020, I remember getting off the airplane, and after being spoiled for so long, for 5 weeks in Japan, just using their trains there, going ahead and using the CTA Blue Line train, it smelled like piss. There was garbage everywhere. The train was completely rickety. It was just a complete downgrade. And after being in O'Hare Airport and after going to the international airports in Japan, I mean, it is night and day. And I just remember the words of my grandfather, who mentioned that he knew the guys who designed O'Hare Airport. He said they didn't know what they were doing. They were full of shit. And this airport is forever going to be known as one big disaster, which in comparison to other international airports, America is far behind. Our system is far behind. Our infrastructure is falling behind. I mentioned before about East Palestine, Ohio. I covered it in my morning show. And how our train system, or how the train systems, they're still under-regulated. Like, there's no accountability. Whereas in Japan, those things have to be accounted for. Those things have to be checked because it's a key part of their infrastructure. And one of the leading cause of why we're so far behind is because we're wasting billions upon billions of dollars into the military industrial complex, the prison industrial complex, and just screwing over the people. So the reason why everything looks so run down in this country, why we're behind, is because we're spending our treasury on unnecessary wars and imprisoning our entire population. So I know it's a little bit of a long rant, but I could relate to Tucker because my disappointment coming back to Chicago after being in Japan in 2020 was just like, wow, we are really that far behind.
Yeah, and it's funny that you said, no, that's a great answer. And he talks a lot about the necessity of interacting with nature, the necessity of going outside, touching grass. I don't know where he lives, but he has a cabin-like house in a remote part of the country where he says he spends a lot of time outdoors. He does hunting, he does fishing, he takes long walks. There's something to be said for that, because I feel like when you're doing the CNN Crossfire show every day, when you're doing the Fox News show every single night, you're spending hours of the day in the office, in the studio, scripting and editing and wardrobe and this and that, you become very divorced from a lot of the natural world, a lot of the real world. And a lot of these insights that he seems to be having, especially this one, is that, we could talk theory, and we could talk ideology, but at the end of the day, people experience life in the real world, and when their experience is good, that at a certain point must be a reflection of leadership, a reflection of the system in which that exists. And for the longest time, guys like Tucker would just not question this U.S. system, and now he seems to be. And I think that is partly because I think he's just kind of a genuinely curious person, probably more so now than he was when he was younger. But also I think that has to do with he's just more of the earth now. I think he lives in the world more now than he did when he was at CNN and Fox.
You brought up a good point, because there was something said to me in Japan. I was at a whiskey museum in Kyoto. It was one of those rare finds that you find there, and it was a lot of fun. And then I noticed a lot of Australian tourists come in, and we were all talking about all the sites in Kyoto. And this one woman said, "You're from Chicago? You're from America?" And I said, "Yes, I'm from America." She said, "We don't see a lot of you guys on vacation anymore." Right. And and you mentioned how Tucker's being worldly, and people, have you noticed, like, Americans, we're mostly at work, we're mostly going to work, coming back home, we're mostly maybe going to our schools, then coming back home, doing work or whatever. We're not having time to see the rest of the world. So to even understand that maybe we're behind is now becoming a privilege in its own right. If you can travel and see how the rest of the world is living, and in comparison to how our country is, it is probably an awakening moment of why we are so far behind, and also how did we get here? Because many Americans probably assume that, okay, well, this is how it is. We're number one. The media tells me we're a superpower, and I just got to go along with my daily business. But if people do have the chance to go out and see another country, that changes their perspective. And in many ways, when I was coming back from Japan, I really missed the efficiency, the cleanliness. I missed how things were being run. And just coming back to Chicago, it was like being dunked into cold ice water. My mind was not ready to really comprehend just how bad it is here and how we can greatly improve ourselves, but we can't, because we're spending all of our money on war, on prisons, and bailing out banks, and our politicians are doing wonderful insider trading, so they're living their best lives. So it comes to no surprise why many Americans aren't as aware of how the rest of the world is operating and what they do to improve their citizens' lives.
That's absolutely true. But I think part of the reason why more Americans are starting to question the system is because, as Tucker said, things around here not looking too good. Let's go to an exhibit here. This is what we have in our country.
Oh, beautiful.
Our country. What the fuck is this, you say? America, fuck yeah! Yeah. What is this? What the heck
Paul
is
Verhoeven
this?
movie. It looks like something from a Paul Verhoeven movie.
It does. It really does. You're
like
right.
Like next RoboCop or something.
Yeah. Look at that, folks. Look at that. These are unfinished residential skyscrapers in Los Angeles. The Smithsonian Magazine did a write-up on this just a few days ago. Graffiti artists tagged 27 floors of abandoned skyscrapers in Los Angeles. The street art brought new attention to a $1 billion project that's been stalled since 2019. Graffiti artists broke into downtown Los Angeles Oceanwide Plaza skyscraper development earlier this month and tagged over 27 floors with bright, bold letters. The work was a collaboration between local artists who spray painted the complex over the course of 3 days with words like dank and amen. While the Oceanwide Plaza was meant to be a $1 billion real estate project in downtown LA, it's been empty since 2019. According to the LA Times' Summer Lin and Robert Gauthier, the plan was to build 3 neighboring towers that would serve as luxury condominiums and apartments alongside hotel and retail space. However, construction stopped when the Beijing-based developer backing the project ran out of funds. The towers sit unfinished across from Crypto.com Arena, which recently hosted the Grammy Awards. In many ways, the structure provided a perfect canvas for local artists. Yeah, that's why this made the news lately, because I guess, when they do the external, aerial shots of the arena, the venue for the Grammys, they couldn't help but seeing these would-be luxury condo skyscrapers being repurposed into giant street art projects. So that's what we have going for us here. No disrespect to our street artists. Street art is art, but it's not the Moscow subway system.
No, it's not. But also, when I see stuff like that, that is a true representation of the rage people are feeling right now. Even before doing this show, I remember having conversations with a lot of my family members about the downtown skyscrapers. And when I went to see Godzilla -1 earlier this month, I got off at Adams and Wabash and I decided to walk a little bit down State Street just to check it out. And there are many storefronts that are empty. Many businesses that used to be there. It was like it was walking almost in the middle of a ghost town, because there was a time walking down State Street or walking down Michigan Avenue, you had to say, "Excuse me, please get out of my way, look out." And even walking to AMC River East 21, there was abandoned buildings, there was abandoned storefronts, and even these luxury condos and everywhere else. No one can afford to live in these buildings. So who are you building these buildings for? Why are you building them up if no one can afford to live in them? So whatever kind of message they were saying, if it was art for just art's sake, or they just did it because they want to give a middle finger to the system, that is a rage people are feeling in the streets, because people can't afford their rent. People can't afford to own a house. It is becoming not just a dream. It's becoming a legend, a myth about owning a home or living somewhere in an affluent city. You just can't do it in America because the price is too high. Who are you building these buildings for if only 1% of the population can actually afford it? And even then, they ran out of funds. They ran out of goddamn funds to build the building. So they're just there now. If they don't maintain it, then yes, there will be some failures along the way if there's no maintenance. You just can't build a building there and assume that's just going to be fine. Things do fall apart.
Yes. Or, a building like that could stay up for years and years without being torn down. That's how the High Line Park formed in New York City. That was an above-ground train line. And the city, after that train went out of fashion because the advent of, cars and trucks and vans sort of replaced freight trains citywide for shipping freight into New York Harbor, the city didn't want to invest the money to tear it down. They figured this would cost more to tear it down than it would to just fucking leave it there. So you could start seeing these real urban wastelands start to spring up in cities from coast to coast. And that has a lot to do with what Tucker was talking about, how, this country just feels like a shell of its former self, while these other countries are becoming more and more advanced to the point where they're better places to live. And if a place is a nicer place to live than the place you're living, at a certain point, you're going to start to ask a lot of questions that you may have not asked in the past about where you live and the system that undergirds your way of life.
Please clap.